Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, is there a bias against Asian applicants? A great article by Andrew Belasco of College Transitions. Mark and Anika will discuss how can I avoid common financial pitfalls. Our bonus content by Mark this week is what is the admission funnel? How does this funnel work? And how does it impact your student? Our interview is part 2 of 4 with Mark Kantrowitz on the new Simplified FAFSA. And our college spotlight comes to you from my own home backyard, DePaul University, given to us today by Dr. Lisa Ruff.
And friends, I'm coming to you as a fully vaccinated man. It feels good. I got the second one yesterday, Dave.
Good for you, man. You are now ready to weather the vicissitudes and the storms of life.
Well, I know you and Lisa had your second one like ages ago. I'm late to the game, but I have this like invincible feeling now. So, but you know, when I got it, they said, you know, I got Pfizer, and they said, you know, it hasn't been proven yet to withstand the South African strain, you know, or the Brazilian strain, only the European one. So still wear your mask. That's what they told me.
That's true.
I do not want to hear them come back and say that tests say that it doesn't, you know, stand up for the Brazilian strain. So I'm going to be a little dark.
Well, the good news is the CDC also came out saying that it's not really necessary to wear your mask outdoors now. And there's some controversy about its effectiveness in terms of the distance. But I saw a jogger the other day and jogging faithfully with his mask and his face visor.
No, thank you. No, thank
I want to
you.
tell him, dude, you can really ditch the face visor. I mean, really.
That was just to withstand some of Chicago's cold, man. That's all that was.
Well, I said, maybe if it's bulletproof, it has some facility. But
there you go. All right, Dave, we got a lot to cover today. We got a lot we're jamming into this episode. So I'm going to dive right in, and we're going to go right into the admissions tip.
Okay, let's do it, man.
Yeah, and you know, and my admissions tip today is one I just shared with family yesterday, which is weave a theme throughout your whole entire application. So the admission officer, when you're reading an application, you're trying to get the kid, you're trying to connect the dots, you're trying to figure out who is this person and what will they bring to our community. And so if I'm working with a student and let's just say they're incredibly passionate about working with the homeless. So what do I mean by weave a theme? Well, let's start with the essay. There's a fantastic opportunity to make an impression about how you care about homelessness. So there's an opportunity right there. However, let's talk about the teacher recommendation. You know, the teacher recommendation, I would love students to have conversations with teachers and to say, in effect, listen, I'm not trying to tell you what to say by all means, but if you're comfortable, I'd love for you to talk about my final essay on homelessness and convey how much I care about that. Because now I'm seeing the teacher talk about homelessness. I'm seeing the essay talk about it. And of course, your activities, it should jump off the page. And now what I'm doing as an admissions officer is I'm saying, this is a student that's going to come to our campus and they're going to be an activist on homeless issues. And if you can be that one kid, that one piece of the puzzle that was the most or one of the most activists on that issue, that's how you become memorable. That's what we call the angular student. So I feel like I need to stop my fire here, Dave, or I'll be doing another 10-minute rant. But weave a theme throughout your application that makes you memorable. Of course, it does need to be authentic.
You used to call that also known as the hook.
It's also known as being well lopsided.
That's right.
All kind of terms. I'm pulling on from past admissions vernacular, though sometimes I might not have used these yet. I don't know if I used that one. Anyway,
that's right.
There we go. All right, now we're going to switch to admissions vernacular. And because you're for the last couple, I'm giving you a medium. I'm going to give you a hint before I even give this one. All right.
All right. That's good.
So the hint is I synced this selection once again to our article topic, just like I did last time with CTE programs. All right. And the term is anchoring bias. What would anchoring bias be?
Oh, I know this. I think that when you have someone who works in the admission office, whatever they are good at or whatever they are familiar with tends to be the qualities that they look for in other applicants. In other words, if they grew up as a science geek, they love the science geek application. They can't really understand the artsy fartsy kid. But if they're a dancer, they love the dancers and they can't really understand the science geek. So they have to overcome their own personal preferences when reading applications.
Boy, that is so close. I'm hesitating in my mind whether to give you credit.
Oh,
Because I'm a sadist, I'm probably going to say no, but it was close. So you got the bias part mostly right. Anchoring bias is any preconceived view that an admission officer has that they read the file through that perspective. So let's say their view is, I just don't think kids that don't get 1,200 on the SAT or 24 on the ACT are going to do well in our program. If that's their view, then they read the file through that perspective. You know?
well, that's so much what I sort of said.
Sort of, but you said it was their own giftedness that created the bias, and that's just not slightly true. It's just it could be anything at all. Like you could have the view, you could have the bias that if I don't see at least 6 activities in the common app activity section, then I see that as someone who wasn't that involved. You know what I mean? So it's just any particular bias that you take that filters how you see everything. Anchoring bias.
All right.
And I'm not going to forget this week because I'm not going to bring Anika in like I had to last time. I created another column. The big number. The big number.
All right. The big number. Let's go for it.
The big number this week. It doesn't seem that big, but when I break it down, it will. 5.7. 5.7. You're thinking that's not a big number. So what is 5.7? 5.7 is how many times you are more likely to be admitted to Colby College if you applied early decision versus regular. So let's look at the stats. Early decision acceptance rate, 43.4. Regular decision acceptance rate, 7.6. What's the difference between 7.6 and 43.4? 5.7 times. So let's look at it in another perspective. Almost a 1 in 2 chance of admission ED, 1 in 14 regular. That's what you call holding you hostage and saying, apply ED or, you're screwed.
That's right. Show us you love us.
But I would not say to people that automatically means you should apply ED if that's not a school you want to go to. But you should be mindful of the statistics when you're looking at schools. So the big number is kind of a small one, but it makes a big point. 5.7. All right, Dave, we got a hot topic today. One thing we pride ourselves on, your college-bound kid.
Hot topic, yes.
We're not going to avoid controversial issues, even that we know this is the kind of topic we're walking into a political landmine, and we're bound to get some irate emails. But no matter what we say, but we're not going to avoid it. So let's take it on. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
It's so hot that the paper is sizzling. I have to put it down. It's burning my fingers. But
it's
it
true.
is.
He's not. That's not embellishment. Almost close.
That's right. But here's a topic. Is there a bias against Asian college applicants by Andrew Belasco? So what we're going to do, Mark, is we're going to break this article down into part 1 and part 2. And part 2 is exploring, is there a bias, and going through some of those statistics. And part 1, is there a bias? And part 2 is, well, we sort of answered it. If there is a bias, what can Asian students do about it? Sounds good?
Sounds good.
So what are the stats? Okay, well, the stats is from 2000 to 2015, the Asian population grew 72%, but it's still a rather small fraction of the U.S. population. Right now, it's 5.6%. But check this out. 5.6% of the population, but among elite colleges, they are overrepresented by a factor of 4, 5, sometimes 6 times. So Caltech, 37% of their student population is Asian. UC Berkeley, 35%. Carnegie Mellon, 31%. Stanford, 23%. Princeton, 22%. Harvard, 21%. They gave more schools, but you get the picture.
Yeah,
Asians,
MIT 30, UCLA 28.
That's right,
Hopkins 27. So this is not an one-off. It's actually the norm at your elite private institutions.
Right. So your first thing is, hey, wait a second. If they're 5, 6% of the population, but they're overrepresented by a factor of 4 or 5 in some of these elite institutions, what is the issue? Well, here's the issue. In 2019, the SAT on average for all U.S. students was 1059. But for Asians, it was 1223. And research from very respected institutions such as Princeton University.
Dave loves saying that, by the way.
That's right.
It is a Princeton study he's quoting, and he just loved getting his little alma mater in there. I just had to get that out there.
Absolutely. Especially since my daughter dissed it. I used to tell her, you could have been a tiger, but now you're a dog. She went to Yale.
For you new listeners, Dave's still not over the fact that his daughter decided that she did not want to go to Princeton. So he brings that up from time to time.
That's right. That's one of her few shortcomings in life. But anyways, Asians need on average 140 points higher on the SAT than whites to have an equal chance of admission, according to according to this Princeton University study. And in this 2005 study, they found that if race was eliminated from consideration, Asian acceptance rates would rise about 6% across the board. There's more to it, but Mark, I want to stop here because I want to see where you want to take this and see which avenues you want to explore more in depth.
No, great intro there, Dave. That was awesome. And one of the things in that Princeton study, they created a term for it, and they call it the Asian tax.
Right.
The Asian tax. So I want to talk about this because this is really complex, and I'm going to try to see if we can do justice. Like always, the hardest part on this podcast is capturing the nuance just right. And so do our best to do that. So I'll start by saying 1/3 of the students I work with are Asian, and they are some of the most incredible students that I work with in terms of not just their drive and their academic accomplishments, but their sterling character. But having said that, even that, a statement like that is fraught with complexity because there's a myth out there called the model minority. And Asians hate that myth, and I would hate it too. One of the Asian students I worked with this year, she became so passionate about her absolute disdain for that term, the model minority, that she wrote multiple essays on it, both at her school and even in her college application. And as she put it to me, it completely discredits all of my hard work. It'd be like saying, let's say, Dave, you were an incredible athlete. Now we know that we're laughing here. We know this is fiction here to say Dave's an incredible athlete because we've heard the stories of the Princeton JV coach having to pull Dave aside and tell him, get off the court, man. You can't play. Stop trying to make the team.
Yeah. They never confused me for Zion Williamson, that's for sure.
Well, let's say you were an incredible athlete and you busted your butt to become the absolute best you can be, and all anybody ever said to you is, the only reason you're good is you got your parents' genes. Your dad was a really good player. You got his genes, and that's the only reason you're good. It's insulting. So I realize even in me complimenting how impressed I am with the Asian American students I work with, even that is fraught with controversy and may not always be received well by people. But it is true. I'm incredibly impressed with the overwhelming majority of the Asian American students that I work with, and colleges see an incredible talent stream, that comes to them from the Asian American community. Another thing I want to mention is not all Asians are the same. And so I said this over and over again, colleges want what they don't have. And so you can be from certain Asian populations, and it can actually be a hook for you in the admission process because we don't get. I was just talking to somebody this week, an Asian student in the 11th grade, and she's from a very unique country, and that will actually help her because it's unique diversity. So it's important to mention that. And Dave, I think it is important that we introduce the orchestra example here. Do you want to share that, and then I'll say a few more things?
Well, yes. I mean, so many times it's been commented on that choosing a college cast is like choosing an orchestra, that essentially you want to play music. You want to have a symphony. And with symphony, you want all instruments to be represented. And in reality, in life, there is an imbalance because so many kids interested in classical music end up going for the violin or the viola. And in fact, when it comes to building an orchestra, it's far easier to win a spot being a bassoonist or being a timpanist or being a French horn, because there are just simply less players out there auditioning for that particular spot. But you need all those instruments in order to play music. You cannot play Mozart without having a bassoonist. And so, many times when we look at subpopulations, Asians, blacks, whites, urban, rural, and so forth, schools want to have a diverse representative population. And if it's just harder to find a Native American or someone from rural Alaska who happens to be white than it is to find an urban Asian, it does mean that it's harder for that one particular person to win that violin spot because he has more competitors for that one particular spot, that one particular musical instrument. Did I say that correctly, Mark?
Yeah, you said it, but I'm going to be even more direct. I'm going to mention real data. So there's a program out there, Dave's familiar with it, called a BSMD program. And what happens is, coming right out of high school, you can get accepted basically almost automatically into medical school. Let's put it that way. It's usually, programs are usually 8 years, sometimes 7, occasionally, like there's one in Kansas City that's 6. But you can know, I can forego the whole medical school admission process by getting direct admitted into this BSMD program. Well, in last year's class and this year's class, so the 2021 class and the 2022 class, I have 9 students interested in pursuing BSMD. All 9 of them, not only are all 9 Asian, all 9 are South Asian. All 9. And I'll give you an example of something that I really respect. So one of the ones I'm working with right now in the junior class, his mom's a doctor, and we're having conversations, about his list. And she was like, Mark, these schools don't want everybody in their BSMD programs to be Indian American. So I hope you take that into consideration. And I respected her understanding of how things are. And that's just the reality. Now, is it fair? You can argue that yes or no. I do believe if these schools would have been founded by Asian Americans and founded by Asians, there would be a lot more people. So we are working from a place where whiteness is the norm, and schools are only going to deviate so much from whiteness as the norm. And I do believe that adversely impacts Asian Americans in the process. But on the other hand, the orchestra, there is truth to the orchestra as well, which is schools feel like you'll make better music if you have different types of people, spread throughout your school. And one of the things that was quoted in the article you read, Dave, when you described the Princeton study, I'm going to read it right here. Among the more telling quotes were that Asian applicants had, quote, very familiar profiles, and that some Asian individuals were referred to as, here's the quote, standard pre-meds. And so I'm not saying to Asian students not to pursue medicine. That is not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that adds to the difficulty of the process because it can make applicants start to look very similar. And the more applicants look similar, the more it's harder to distinguish yourself, and it gets more difficult to stand out. And that's the reality. So you just have to know that if you're going to have the same career interests as the overwhelming number of people. Remember, people may not like to hear this, but the way admissions works at a selective school is social engineering. You get put into a bucket. So you're going to get put into a bucket. And the bucket is lots of things, right? It's a gender bucket. It's are you living on campus or off campus bucket? It's is it freshman admission or transfer admission bucket? Is it what state are you coming from? But it's also your race and ethnicity. So friends, I want to make sure that I'm painting the nuance. So not every single Asian American is seen as overrepresented and subject to the Asian tax because schools are coming at it from a view where whiteness is perceived as the norm. There are some Asian American groups, and certainly this is at schools that are the most holistic in their evaluation, that are a prize catch and are beneficiaries of affirmative action because they're so difficult to get or because of the discrimination that they have encountered. And some of those groups are Vietnamese students, Cambodian students, Laotian students, and Hmong students. And Dave, you know a little bit about Hmong students. Why don't you share a little bit about it? Because that might be a new term for some people.
Well, I just know it because they were featured on Clint Eastwood movie.
Oh, you would know Clint Eastwood, Mr. Clint Eastwood. You rebel, you.
That's right.
Movie knowledge here. The movie hour on your college-bound kid.
Yes, I'm familiar with the great Clint Eastwood movie Gran Torino, and it featured the Hmong community, but it really emphasized the fact that not all Asian communities are the same. This is a refugee community, came over after Vietnam. They share very many of the discriminations that African Americans had in the past, especially in their home communities. And as we look at Southeast Asians and people from various areas of Polynesia and so forth, we see that there are cultural differences and socioeconomic differences among Asians that are not accurately reflected in this term Asian. So there's a lot more nuance in terms of what's going on within the Asian communities than what is popularly believed. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're about to transition. And so what do? You're an Asian American. Are you saying I'm screwed? Because here's a quote from the article, and I would agree with this. It says, however, a deeper examination of the available data evidence reveals conclusively that the reality is that for Asian American students, as well as Asian international students, competition for a place at a prestigious university in the U.S. is unquestionably stiffer. And I would agree with that from all of my experience. It just to me, it's indisputable.
Yes, it is.
Now, one thing I will say, college admission officers do look at a student through the prism of the advantages that they have educationally in their family. And you do see a lot of Asian doctors, double doctors, and people have a tendency to think a 1550 SAT is a 1550 SAT. It's better than a 1350. 1550 is better than 15. It's not how admission officers think. They say, if you're a 1550 and you've got double doctor, and as kid's got a 1350 in their first gen, that 1350 may be better than that 1550. And that's something the public has a hard time getting their hands around. But that is how admission officers think, because there's so many advantages of parent education when it comes to test scores. So those are, I think we hit a lot of the issues, but now let's talk about, well, what's our advice? And the article actually goes through 5 or 6 really good points that it makes in terms of what their advice is for Asian students. Do you want to? Yeah, let's jump. Yeah, go ahead, do your thing, Dave.
How can Asian students overcome these obstacles? Number 1, shine on essays. Number 2, excel even more on standardized testing. Number 3, consider elite liberal arts colleges. Number 4, apply to flagship public universities. Number 5, consider applying ED. And number 6, for international students, highlight your English proficiency. So, Mark, why don't we deal with these one by one?
Everyone is a great point. Let's talk about the essays. Essays are a fantastic opportunity for you to emotionally connect with the admission officer, who will be the territory manager, and second readers, third readers, and create a bond and allow yourself to be more than just a test score, and to allow your personality to come through. And this is really the place where that emotional connection happens, where people see so much of what you're bringing to the community, or your likability is elevated, and that so that people feel like, man, I just love this kid and I want him so badly, or I want her so badly to come into our school, into our context. So, the article makes some good points. Don't be afraid to share what you're different. Talk about what keeps you up at night. Talk about the problems you want to solve, but do it in a powerful way through the power story that you emotionally connect. And once again, I can't emphasize being different is good. If you're seen as very similar to the other people that you're in the same bucket as, it's just extremely, extremely difficult to stand out. And the second point, excel even more in standardized testing. This is a good point as well. So basically what they're getting at here, it's that Asian tax, right? So national scores for Asians on math is a 637. That's a national number. And so if you're going to be, it's kind of like what I did a couple of weeks ago, Dave, when we did the whole thing about you're either part of a lobbyist group in the admissions where you have someone on the other side lobbying for you, whether it's, the development office, the alumni office, some of the orchestra, athletics, multicultural recruitment, faculty kid, all that. Somebody's internally lobbying for you, or you're just folks. And when you're in the just folks group, you can't basically just look at a typical profile and think that if you hit these standards, you're competitive, because you're really not. You need to use things like early decision and other things to your advantage. So this is true, very true for Asians when it comes to testing. And so basically what they're recommending, which is kind of good advice, instead of looking at the median scores for Asians, you really kind of need to look at the upper quartile. Now, I'm saying Asian in a general sense here. I'm referring mostly to Indian American and then Chinese American and populations where schools are, have an abundance of applicants. I'm not referring to what we said before, the Laotians, the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, that's completely different. This does not apply at all. Your scoring can be on the low side and you can be competitive.
And can I give a personal example? You often said, Mark, that to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yeah.
And I remember with Lauren, when she did her SATs and her testing came back at 1,500 and you thought that was adequate. But the lab school, when she was there, asked her to retake them again, because their expectation was most of the kids applying to their schools would be in the 1,530 to 1,550 range. So the point being is, under most circumstances, that's an acceptable SAT score, more than acceptable. But given that you have had so much exposure academically, that this is the peer standard. So, many times with Asians, the peer standard is a lot higher. So unfortunately or fortunately, because you've had the resources, it means that you need to score even higher to stand out from the particular subgroup that you will be evaluated in.
Yeah, because, I mentioned the 9 students I work with, BSMD programs, all of them being Asian. I think every single one, their test scores were between 1510 and 1580, every single one. And so, that's what schools are seeing. So you need to, if you're looking at test scores and you're not in an underrepresented Asian category, then you need to be in that top quarter.
Right.
You need to look at, okay, what's the 75th percentile? Am I above that to assess whether you may be competitive for that school?
And keeping in mind that at these top schools, 25% of the scorers are submitting perfect test scores.
Right.
So, there's an upper limit there that you just have to hit sometimes when you're competing in these particular subgroups. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to soften that a little bit. I don't want someone to hear you have to be perfect or don't apply. But I'll say that you need to have some extremely favorable other things to counteract that if that's not where you're at. Let me just be a little more nuanced there. The next thing is the liberal arts one. This is a really, really important one because in the culture, universities have so much stature. So if you have college behind you, you get dinged. And so there's so much more interest in applying to a university. It doesn't just have to be Ivy. It can be Boston University, NYU. Like these are incredibly popular places, right? University. And so what it does is it creates opportunity for colleges. So one of the things the article does is it mentions, well, early on it had acceptance rates for places like the MITs and the Cal Berkeleys and the Caltechs, and they were usually either, or so not acceptance rates, I'm sorry, the percentage of the population was Asian. And it was normally either in the 30s or high 20s, right? for liberal arts colleges, I mean, it has some here that are single digit. Carleton, 9%, Bowdoin, 7%, Wesleyan, 7%, Bates, 5%. So that can be an opportunity to not have the Asian tax hurt a student. And it goes on to say, yes, I realize that's not a household name in maybe the circles you come from, but you'll be just as respected as you apply to grad schools and professional schools coming from those schools that are highly respected. So I thought that was a really good point it made.
And Mark, I really want to point out that you often talked about the fact that within many Asian communities, there's a real bias against liberal arts colleges. So
Incredible.
many of them think that they have to go to the national research universities, not realizing that Amherst and Swarthmore and Williams and Wesleyan and Bates and Kenyon are every bit as good academically as these national colleges and have every bit as strong of pre-professional programs. So if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you have just as good a chance, and sometimes even better, coming from these pre-med programs at these top liberal arts colleges. So one way to actually step out is to realize that, you're looking at Cadillacs, but right over here, nobody's looking at the BMW, and the BMWs are just as good as the Cadillacs and just as prestigious, by the way.
Yeah, I used to rail on that point, Dave, a lot more than I do now. I've come to realize just how hard it is. Coming from their culture, if it has college behind it, it's like high school. And I didn't even realize this until I had a conversation with my own sister. And because, I've been gone from Canada for so long, and my sister's still a teacher in Canada. And she's like, Mark, don't confuse college and university. Because in Canada, college is, not the same thing at all. And I realize it's so hardwired, the difference between college and university in certain cultures, that it's a big, you really need to present people with data and really take a long time to educate them, to expect them to get that. Because there's been a hard wiring for a really long time that college is not the same academic path as university is. So it's not the easiest thing to get people there, but, it's possible to try to get them there when you see outcomes for, if you've got someone that does want to go to med school, which a high percentage of Asian applicants do, you can see the path is there. The next point it makes is really good as well. Apply to flagship public universities. And the reason why that's such a good point, and it mentions it in the article, is it says that many times they offer formula-based admission processes rather than holistic. And you having really strong numbers will actually help you. And you also can get that national recognition because it has university. Like, it's much easier for me most of the time, Dave, when working the majority of Asian students I've worked with, to convince them to go to a place like the University of Pittsburgh, which, than it is to try to have them look at Harvard for college, two schools in the same state, just because it has that university behind it. And so looking at not only flagships, but just other really well-known, nationally large public universities, that can be a really, really good way to go. And then, of course, we don't say anything more about apply early decision. We already know that it's much easier for anybody getting an ED. So that's the summary, Dave. Any final points?
Well, yes. And I mean, the one I really want to emphasize is expanding your scope of schools to include these excellent liberal arts colleges. And you mentioned the flagship public universities. I think there's so much of a herd mentality among us all that we all crowd around the one maker car. We all want a Tesla. We all want to, whatever.
Well, not all, just you on that.
Well, a Model S,
Okay.
I mean,
your Tesla obsession is unparalleled by our listener base. You're not your own category.
Can't understand the need to go to Harvard, but the need to get a Model S, I can get that. No, but seriously, I think the most powerful thing on the list is expanding your list of potential schools. That's the easiest thing to do, and I think that's the biggest bang for your buck.
And I want to make a comment on that. This is not an Asian American point. If I had to give one overall point to all listeners, it's stop thinking that all the great schools are in the Northeast. They're in Boston, or New York or Philly. And there's such a herd of people looking at those schools. Now, listen, they're great schools there. And I will absolutely tell you they're great schools. And I'm not saying not to look there. And if that's where you want to be, that's where you want to be also. You know what I mean? If that's where you want to be, Maybe you want to live there or whatever. I get it. But just understand you're putting yourself into a much, much more competitive bucket for similar quality. That's just be aware of that. And that's not a point to Asian Americans. That's a point to all Americans.
And then I just also want to make this final point. While there is an Asian tax and while it's definitely harder to get into school as an Asian, it's still ridiculously hard no matter what you are. Here's the key statistic. Harvard admissions 2000 to 2017, getting in as a white 11.1%, getting in as an Asian 8.1%. So definitely it's harder, 3%, but that's still really hard no matter who you are.
Well, Dave, I'll go one better. Current admission rates are out for regular decision for Ivies, and pretty much every Ivy was between 3 and 6% regular.
Right.
So you had Harvard at 3.3, you had Columbia at 3.7, you had Princeton at 4, you had Yale a little bit over 4, and then Penn was 5.8, and Dartmouth was 6.1, and just can't believe I have a memory for numbers. I can't believe I remember all these, but they pretty much are all 3 to 6% of a ridiculously crazy population. So yeah, just understand that those schools are, and this is a term one of our listeners sent in that I really, really like, reach for alls. They're a reach for alls. There's a reach go for everybody when you're dealing with those type of acceptance numbers. So this is, if you're not Asian, don't tune this out and think this doesn't apply to me, because it does.
Yeah. And I really want to emphasize, I talk to Mark all the time about the various students that he's dealing with. All these students are so good. Whatever the race,
really are.
Whatever the class, the differences are infinitesimal. Okay, I'm going to go back to my Model S standard, okay? It's like...
Of course you are.
0 to 60, it's right. 2.3 seconds, or versus another 0 to 60, 2.5. That's not a significant difference. You might say 2.3, 2.5. It's still throwing you back in your seat and filling you with exhilaration and excitement. All right. And that's what a lot of these kids do. And these numerical differences are just become completely insignificant in the bigger picture of the fact that you're choosing from truly excellent students of all races.
And I have a very simple solution to it. Understand that there's more than 30 great schools in the country. Just if you can just accept that you can go down the selectivity tier just a little bit and still find incredible opportunities, not only will you diminish so much stress in this process, you'll have more fun and you'll like your outcomes. So anyway, Dave, that's kind of my hobby horse. It's something, have to get your hobby horse in every now and then. And I had to go off. You did yours with Tesla. I did mine on obsessing on the one, what I call the 1%ers.
Yeah.
The 1% of the hardest schools in the country. So
now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Friends, we are down to Anika's last 2 episodes. Savor the moment. Enjoy every morsel of wisdom that she bequeaths to you.
Oh, you said like this podcast is just not gonna keep thriving even more.
So here's what's gonna happen, because I know you. Little John is 11 now, right? Am I right?
Oh my God, he's about to be 13.
13?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, how did that happen?
I don't know.
How did that happen on me? Need to update the website.
Right?
Okay. So when he gets to be about 16, you're going to be all into this stuff again to see what's changed. I know you. Because you're not a last-second person on that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to start talking about high school next week.
Yep. Awesome. So, but before we get to your own countdown, we are doing a countdown of where CEOs went to undergrad. Based on a 2018 study from a very credible source. We had 10. And by the way, that little clanging you over there is Anika getting her food on.
You can hear that?
I hear it.
Oh, I thought I turned the mic off.
No, you did it.
Sure.
She's eating while I'm beside. See how comfortable she is? See how comfortable she is?
Sorry, Mark. I thought
That's okay. That's okay. Tied at number 10. We have Yale, Illinois, Bucknell, Texas. That's UT Texan and Austin. Princeton, Lehigh, SUNY, Binghamton, and Michigan State University. all tied for 10th spot. We have 4 schools tied at 6. We've said UPenn and Philly, Cal Berkeley, Berkeley, California, Texas A&M and College Station. And the last one before we get into the top 5, which will be the next 5 weeks, Purdue University. We go to the Midwest. We go to West Lafayette, Purdue. That's 6 of the 500 CEOs went to Purdue.
Okay, Mark, but before you move on, so is this like a big deal in their marketing materials? Is this like the thing to talk about? Of course it is.
Okay. I mean, they have lots of things, but this is definitely one you're going to talk about.
Oh, okay.
And especially in business, but overall, true. I mean, schools look for their brag points. I'll say this really quickly. I was this is 2 or 3 years ago now. I was talking to a family that I was working with from Manhattan, and they had gone and visited 2 schools. It was Boston University was one, and I want to say it was Northeastern. And I was asking them how it went. And it was very interesting to me. You know what? I'll be a little nondescript here and say this. One of the 2 schools they felt was always telling them, like, we're ranked this here and we're ranked here. We've got this award. We've got that award. And the other school didn't do any of that. So do you think they were impressed with the school that did it or the school that didn't do it?
I'm going to say the school that didn't do it.
Nope, they were impressed with the school that did it.
Oh, darn.
And, yeah.
That was a trick question.
And so that just resonated with me, because they're like, this school told us we're ranked number 2 here. We're ranked number 8 here. We've got this, we've got that. And the other school just didn't do that. And they're like, I mean, if you're good, you should have some things to talk about. And the reason why I say that is if you want to know why schools are always telling you that why they're ranked this, why they're ranked that, because they're actually in tune with how people think.
Okay.
So I say all that to say you can be darn sure that this stuff's getting into marketing materials.
Just curious.
All right. So as Nika and I said in our pre-planning meeting, we're going to try to blow through this chapter pretty quickly because I have a lot I want to share on our bonus content. So chapter 170 says, how can I avoid some of the common financial pitfalls? These are things that either lead to excessive debt or they lead to students dropping out. Anika, you've read the chapter. What jumped out at you?
Well, let me tell you, you say you want to blow through it. And the one that I really want to hone in on is the one where you say, how about don't attend a school that you can't afford? Mm-hmm. And the reason why I want to talk about that one is because I wonder if that still applies to kids who are prone to get a lot of scholarship money, or are you just saying that in general?
No, in general, people make the big mistake of attending a school they can't afford. Mm-hmm. They don't vet a school financially. I'm always looking for academic match, social match, emotional match, financial match. Mm-hmm. And, we have all kinds of listeners. We have people that have the money all saved for 4 years for all their kids. It's in the bank. Sometimes grandparents do it. Then we have other people that have 0 EFCs and are counting on full scholarships, and we have everything in between. Mm-hmm. So it's tricky talking about this because you have such a range of listeners. And, and so what you might say one thing, it might apply to somebody and something else, it doesn't apply to somebody else. But what I will say is that in general, the way the college process is set up, it does everything backwards. Like people go through the process of trying to find out what schools they love and where they can get in. And then they find out what kind of money they can get. And by then they're like the fish on the hook that's being reeled in. Because,
emotionally invested.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying in sales, I did sales for 6 years, professional sales, Dun & Bradstreet, Paychecks, several Fortune 500 companies. But it says this. People buy on emotion and they justify with logic. That's important. People buy an emotion and they justify with logic. So, unfortunately, because of the fact that you have things like Parent Plus loans out there and other things as well, like tapping your money in your home and other things like that, there's not sort of safeguards in place. Like you have safeguards in place that stop you from buying a house you can't afford because you got to run credit checks and you got to have the right debt to income ratios or you just don't get qualified, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can afford a $400,000 house, you're not going to be able to go buy an $800,000 house. If you can afford a $200,000 house, you're not going to be able to buy a $400,000 house because you're not going to get approved. But unfortunately, because of the way the financial aid system is up, one, you're finding out the money at the very end after you're already emotionally hooked, and two, there's almost unlimited borrowing through Parent Plus loans, and you don't have to have amazingly high credit score to get a Parent Plus loan. It really sets people up to make, horrendous financial decisions.
Yep.
And then there's this mindset that says, my kids worked really, really hard and they deserve to be able to go to wherever they want to go. And a lot of parents create that expectation with their kids. So, I do this workshop for KIP, where I work in the day, and I have parents stand up and repeat. And I want them to get it ingrained in them. And I have them say, I am, and they have to say, I am. And then I say, not a bad parent, not a bad parent. Then they have to say, because I refuse to allow my child to go to an unaffordable college. Because I'm giving them that permission structure. And of anything I've ever done, at least the staff, we have a staff of 11. They said that they feel that's the most impactful thing I've ever done, is to chisel into people's mind that thinking, because that is not how a lot of people think. They think, but they've been such a good kid, and this is the only thing they've ever wanted. And I'll also say this. Kids don't always make it easy for parents either, because kids don't know what $70,000 or $80,000 a year is really like. I can't tell you how many times I've heard kids say, but I'll get loans, but I'll do this, please, please, I'm having a really hard conversation with the family right now about this. And their kid is saying, but this is the only school that fits me. This is the only school that fits me. And literally the cost of the school is more than what the mom makes.
Wow.
And I'm being very, very firm. You can't go to this school. And the kid is being obstinate. So it's a lot of pressure. That makes a parent feel like they're a really bad parent. So there's a lot of pressure coming at parents who don't kind of get this thing. Set a maximum amount that you'll spend after you do a complete analysis, figure out how much the student's going to spend and how much you're going to spend, and then shop for schools with that in mind.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have a few more in here, but I do want to pop off on the ones that stood out the most. I got two more on here.
I'm really glad you mentioned that one, because that I cannot talk about that enough.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to hear you came out of the gate with that one. I can go to town on that one.
Well, that's a good segue on another one that you have, where you talk about parent enablement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where the kids in there spending all kinds of money, and the parent keeps coming in and trying to bail them out. Well, not even necessarily bail them out, just spending money unnecessarily, which is kind of ties into another one that you make about just spending too much money on things you don't need. Like the kids in there ordering lobster for lunch or whatever else they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't think through those kind of things sometimes. And a lot of times that stuff adds up like crazy, so fast. And I guess it just kind of sneaks up and blows people out the water so much it blows them out of school, because they can't keep going, because they just keep spending ridiculous money.
Yeah, and keep in mind, there's a lot of transitions going on, especially for freshmen that may be living away from home, maybe a long ways away from home. Maybe they've never been away that much before, summer camps and things like that. Or maybe they haven't had a budget or a strict budget, just depending on each family's background. There's a lot of change going on.
Right.
Or I see this a lot. You have more of an under-resourced student, and they're surrounded by a pool of affluence. And it's just the culture to, go out and, go to Ruth Chris or do 5-star dining, and you kind of feel almost like I kind of need to do it. I mean, Ruth Chris is a bit of an embellishment. Okay. I'm making a point, but if it's sort of the culture to spend lavishly because you are around people that can do that, and that's not you, then that can also lead people to make some mistakes that they can regret. Another thing I put in here. Oh, you had one more, Nick. I want to hit your one.
Well, no, the last one. Well, the irony in this last one, you talk about where the kids work too many hours.
Oh, that's the one I was going to hit, because I thought about Miss Anika Madden herself, who, for those of you who don't know, she pretty much worked full time going through undergrad, working through the night.
Yeah, but you're telling me not to work too many hours, though. That's why I'm interested in how you drill down on that.
Well, what I'm saying is that the research shows that when students work 30 hours a week or more, even 25 hours a week or more, graduation rates go way, way down. And so the people that feel they have to do that, I'm going to question, are you in the right school? Are you going to, because remember, there are very affordable ways to get your education. You can go to the 2-year option and then transfer in.
Yeah.
And still end up with a degree. And if you're under-resourced, most of the time, a Pell Grant will cover your complete cost for your 2-year education. So most really under-resourced students can get a 2-year education for free. It does involve staying at home. Now, keep in mind, not everybody lives in a place that's got a community college close by. People are in more remote areas. But there's online options, so there's ways to do this thing and stay within budget.
Yeah. Well, those are my biggies.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. All right, well, that's enough for now because I want to get to the next thing. I got to talk about my enrollment funnel. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. So you want to introduce that, Anika?
Yeah, so bonus content week. Woo woo.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about what you just said, the enrollment funnel,
Mm-hmm.
and how that doggone thing works. Well, first of all, what is it? What is an enrollment funnel?
Well, that's a great question. And so let me answer it. So first of all, let me say this. The enrollment funnel is sometimes called the admissions funnel. I grew up with it being called the admissions funnel. But I actually think the enrollment funnel is a more comprehensive name for it. So I actually like it better. So what it is it's a marketing concept used to define a sequence of events that take a student all along a continuum from a prospect all the way through their enrollment decision. Okay?
Okay.
So, yeah, I grew up with it called the admissions funnel, but I really think the enrollment funnel, and you'll hear both terms, by the way, I think it's a more comprehensive term because it's not just about admitting. You know, this is about taking you all the way from the very start when you're just a prospect all the way to who actually shows up in the fall. And for most colleges, tuition, not only is it the overwhelming number one source for their budget, it's usually over 80%, and then many times it's over 90%. So look at it from a university standpoint. If this is what is going to fund our whole operation, this puppy is really, really important. So another reason why I like the term enrollment funnel is it's not just the responsibility of the admission office. This is the admission office, the marketing team, and all communications. Everybody combines to be a part of this thing, So let's talk about it. One thing I will say is you'll hear different versions, different explanations of what are the stages in the enrollment funnel. Mm-hmm. I'm going to share a model that I like. It's an 8-step model, has 8 phases in it. Another common model you'll hear actually just has 4 stages in it. And those 4 stages are awareness, consideration, yield, and enrollment. That was not the model I was raised on. I'm going to share one that's very, very common that I think is a little bit more precise in describing sort of each of the 8 phases in the funnel. And any idea why it's called a funnel, Anika?
No.
Think of a funnel when you're doing your cooking.
Which I don't do.
Are you a HelloFresh person? Just order from HelloFresh?
I clean, Javon cooks.
Okay. I forgot about that. You did say that before. That's been true for a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You just don't like it? It's not your thing?
I've tried every once in a while, then I go back to not liking it. So
okay.
We digress. Sorry. But hence the reason I can't imagine the funnel.
Okay. So if you think of a funnel, it starts out really wide and it gets really, really narrow. And that's sort of a good description for this because that's how it works. You start out with lots and lots and lots of people. At the end, you have very, very few people. Okay. So it's constantly shrinking throughout as people are making decisions either to leave or move closer to the final stage. So the funnel is kind of, an apt description for it. I also kind of like a relay race. You can relate to that. Danae, I like the relay race too because at multiple places along the baton can be dropped. And, but you'll hear, it's called a funnel, and I think that visually grasps it.
Okay.
So I'm going to teach you an 8-step model that I like, and we'll talk through. So the very first step is prospects. It's prospects. So if you're a school, you have to enroll students, and you have to find students someplace and refer to them as prospects. Way, way, way back in the day, we did one of our admissions vernaculars, I think, unless I'm dreaming. If I didn't do it, I meant to do it. The term prospies, which is a term some schools use for students that are on campus visiting that are prospective students. And so the prospect stage is basically an inquiry generation stage. So this is where the college is trying to drum up as many possible inquiries as they possibly can on hoping to nurture them all the way to the point where they would be enrolled, right? So there's two really common things you'll see, although I'm going to talk at the end about how the enrollment funnel is changing now with internet and contemporary ways off of the old model. But the two most common things you'll see here, Nika, are student search, also called search, which is where, schools buy lists of names from the College Board or from the ACT, and then they just target them. And we've done 2 whole complete segments on that. One, I think, was episode 25. And then another one was in the 80s or 90s, was even more detailed. Both were about 25 minutes, where we went into all the different criteria that schools can use when they're buying these lists of names and how they can micro-target. And that's still the big beast on the block, student search, because it's your quickest way to get access to almost the entire country. Because you figure most people are going to go to college. They're going to take an ACT or an SAT. Now, obviously, it's being challenged now because so many people are going test optional. So it's not as valuable as it used to be. It's also very expensive because you also have to, not only do you pay a lot of money, 50 cents a name, right about 50 cents a name, right? There's colleges and you could buy 500,000 names. So there's $250,000 right there. Okay. And then think about what you have to spend building the marketing materials. Now, back in 2007, I remember we redid a view book. Mm-hmm. And I remember we spent over $300,000. That was 2007.
Good gracious.
To do a view book. Yeah. 14 years ago. So you got to build all these marketing materials. They're extremely expensive because you don't want cheap stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you have postage. So it's a very expensive model. Now, there's also an email version. There's both email and snail mail. But that's an incredible way because you can pretty much get it's the easiest way to get large numbers of people, right? You can, and all the tests really provide that opportunity. Students are asked whether they want to opt in or opt out when they sign up for a test. And I'm talking things like PACT, PSAT, SAT, ACT, APs, all of those things give that opportunity. And like, for example, College Board provides 15 times a year that schools can buy these names. Because think about it, it's like SATs offered 7 times, right? So anyway, so that's the most common way. But the other one to drum up inquiries is recruitment travel. Admission counselors come into the area, they go to fairs, they do high school visits, they do receptions, they travel nationally and internationally, and they're drumming up an initial list of prospects. So those are the 2 most common things you'll hear about in the prospect stage. Any questions on that?
No, we got it.
Next, we go on to the second of 8, which is the inquiry stage. Okay, this is a really big one. The difference between an inquiry and a prospect is an inquiry is someone who has expressed interest. A prospect is just a potential student you may have interest in, but they may not couldn't care less about you. Just because you're blitzing them with mail, it doesn't mean they have any interest at all in you. But when you go to the inquiry stage, now this is like the fish nibbling on the line. So this is why I tell everybody I work with to fill out online the interest form that you'll see on every admission website. And sometimes people are like, well, why do I need to do that? They're already sending me mail. I say, you need to do that because you're only your prospect now. Once you do this, you're an inquiry. And when you go from a prospect to an inquiry, now this is when the school really picks up their messaging with an array of print communication and email communications. So, for example, schools have what we call CRMs, which are customer relationship management systems. Slate is it is the big bully on the block. They're the big one, and they can do very customized communication to you based on where the inquiry came from, demographic data, academic interests, extracurricular interests. So personalized communication through their CRM, creating your portal, setting up a portal, for students, and say, now I encourage you to set up your portal. And then in the portal, they can communicate a lot of information to you about extracurricular things, academic information. They can create checklists in there for you. And basically, once they have you as an inquiry, their goal is to move you to the next phase. Some of the ways they try to move you from prospect to inquiry and from inquiry to the next phase are things like take a virtual tour, come visit our campus, join one of our online chats, join a student chat, join a Zoom session, straight out asking you to apply, sending you Snap apps, VIP apps, These are all things. Oh, meet with an admission counselor. They're going to be traveling into your area. Or would you like to schedule an interview? Or here's a scholarship application. These are all what we call calls to action. And every one of these calls to action is designed to take you now from an inquiry to what phase 3 is, which is an applicant. Any questions on the inquiry stage, Anika?
So are you saying that we're being rated along the way?
Well, it's not so much rated. It's just that, this is why I also like the baton example, because when you're running a race, you can't drop that baton because you got to get to the finish line. Mm-hmm. And so what you're trying to do is it's more like you're trying to nurture it. It's almost like a kid, right? You have a kid and you're trying to nurture them along in their growth. So you're trying to nurture someone from a prospect, flip them to an inquiry, and now you're trying to make an inquiry an applicant. Remember, most inquiries don't actually apply.
Right.
But you're trying to not lose your inquiries. You're trying to turn inquiries into applicants.
Okay.
So, that doesn't mean people aren't being tracked, like your behavior is not being tracked, because it is. Because it's through tracking of behavior that a school knows how much time to spend on somebody versus not spend time on them. So behaviors are being observed. Like it's being observed. If we keep sending you emails, do you open them or not? A lot of times the extra direct mail. So okay, let's say a school is using Student Search, and let's say they're doing a direct mail campaign to target and send stuff to you, right? And then say all of a sudden you go on and you become an inquiry. And you can become an inquiry right off the direct mail campaign. They can have like perforated things detach and send in. They have all kinds of ways of what we call calls to action. They have all these calls to action along the way to test whether or not somebody's interested. So let's say you go ahead and you send in the notice, or maybe they say, hey, we're in your area to do an information session. We'd love to come hear you and see. And you show up. Okay. Now you're taking the next step. A school can change their whole communication strategy and say, you know what, we're going to call everybody who's taken this step, or we're going to send them our view book. It's expensive to produce, but these students have shown more interest than this group over here, so we're going to invest more in them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
And the whole goal is to get you to an applicant. So now let's say you're an applicant. So you've actually submitted an applicant. Now, even this is confusing because, as I've said on the podcast before, there's no standard definition of an applicant. That varies from school to school. But whatever a school's calling an applicant, for these purposes, let's just leave it at that. Now, a bunch of other things kick in. For example, document imaging. All applications, all credentials are digitized into an imaging system, which is used for review. Remember, back when I did admissions, it was paper. We had some stuff online, but it was mostly paper. But I was sort of in that process of moving from paper to online. Now everything's all online. When you read files, you're not. File goes back to an old word when you literally had a manila folder. No, I had a manila folder for all the kids I worked with. Some stuff was online, but I literally had a manila folder. Mm. But that's like dinosaur age stuff now.
Right.
Everything's now, log in your computer, read online kind of thing. So now you've got the imaging that goes in, and then you have, this is a really big deal, enrollment research. So these are what I call the math quants, the super smart math people that crunch all of these numbers, high level statistical analysis, and this is oftentimes done by outsourcing this to a whole entire firm. Like RNL is a really famous one. Ruffalo Noah Levitz, or EAB is another one. And these people are like experts in figuring out from your data how many people you need to admit to get to your class, how much scholarship money you need to give to people to not go over budget, but give people enough to incentivize them to come. It's really very technical on the math side because they're running very sophisticated models. Like, it's not as simple as, okay, we have to accept 5 kids to get one. So we have a class of 1,000. So let's accept 5,000. It's actually not how it works, because in reality, your yield, remember, yield is the percentage of accepted students that enroll. Your yield is going to be way higher for people that live closer to you. It always is, than people that live far away. Your yield is also going to be higher for a lower rated academic applicant. Anytime your academic superstars, they have way more options. So you got to look at these numbers from the standpoint of all your historical data. How do you do with kids from a long distance, kids who are close, your academic superstars, maybe by major? In certain majors, maybe you've got a great reputation in a major. You might have a 65% yield in this one major and have like a 20% yield in another major. So it's really a lot of complicated statistical stuff to figure out how many of these applicants we actually need to admit to get what we need. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So this involves the enrollment research. It involves self-service tool with the portals that schools have, that students have. And a lot of, like, in the portal, we'll have your application status. It'll show what items are missing. And then more outreach. So this is usually a lot of email, sometimes direct mail, communicating with students. Okay, you're now complete, or here's what we're missing. And you're basically trying to nurture someone along, from an applicant to a completed applicant. Any questions so far, Anika?
Still moving down the funnel.
How's that food go over there, by the way?
It's gone.
What were you eating, by the way? May as well tell everybody.
Captain D's.
Oh, Captain D's. Okay. Seafood. First, I thought you said Captain Crunch cereal.
You would never hear those words come from my mouth. Oh.
Well, are you not a cereal fan or not a Captain Crunch
Captain
fan?
Crunch fan.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
it's the worst cereal on the planet.
All right. I won't hear that from you. All right. So then, hopefully, you've admitted, your applicants, if you've targeted correctly, a lot of them are admissible. And so the next phase is the admit phase. Every one of these phases get almost like higher stakes, because the more someone gets nurtured along, the more they become valuable to you. Because it's really tough starting all the way back with the prospect and trying to flip them to an inquiry and trying to get them to an applicant. Now they're admit. So that means they're pre-screened, they're qualified, they meet your standards. And, these are like really high priority people. And so you're trying to do all kinds of things at the admit phase to hopefully continue moving them along the enrollment funnel. Some of those things are admitted student days, all-day events with interacting with faculty, touring campus, meeting everybody you could meet. We call them all hands on deck events. Nobody can take time off, because you might have a student and they might be absolutely like passionate about your exchange program that you have to Ireland. And so the expert on that needs to be available to talk to them about that. So everybody kind of needs to be there, because you never really know like what hot button a kid has that can make the difference between them choosing you or choosing somebody else. This can be out of area receptions. So let's say you have 30 kids that you admitted from Houston. Sure, you're going to do an admitted student visit day. And let's say you're a school in, let's just say, Palo Alto, California. Okay, well, instead of only relying on getting people to Palo Alto, you might say, we are going to go to Houston and do an admitted student event in Houston. We'll come to you. So we call these out of area receptions, and these are all the things that you're trying to do to get your admits and move them along the cycle. Another common thing you'll see is financial aid workshops, set up, come talk to anybody about the money, or, we'll go over your package with you. You'll see all kinds of online engagements, things like group online chats, private social network, maybe like Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat. All these kinds of groups can get set up for students, webinars, Zoom sessions, all the online stuff. And then another thing is like visit a class, come sit in a class. So these are all forms of engagement to keep people moving along the enrollment funnel.
I just wonder how many kids would go through all of that. Because it kind of sounds like the normal process from our end, but when you go through it in that level of detail, it's like, oh, that's a lot of work.
Well, it is a lot, but like I'm giving you the top-down view from the college. Not everybody does all these things, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, I can't imagine the number of kids that would go to this extent and not enroll, but I guess it's still a thing.
Well, yeah, no, because remember, people are doing this for multiple schools, but remember, actually, I'm glad you brought this up. Not everybody does all of these things. So let's just take a look at what I just said. Mm-hmm. They may not do an out-and-area reception in your area, or you may choose not to go. admitted student visit day, you'll probably go to that, but you may not go. Visit the class program, you might pass on that. Financial support, you might be like, no, I'm good with my package, or I didn't need money, so I don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
Online engagement, they might provide a few different things. Maybe you do one of the 5 things they provide. So not everybody does everything.
Okay.
But what people do is they do look at their top 2 or 3 schools now, because now, now you're really at the point where you're trying to figure out where you want to go.
Right.
And where do you want to maybe be for the next 4 years? And, if it's like if you're not a stay-at-home commuting student, you're looking at like moving maybe to another state. Like, it's a really big decision. And so you really are very curious to discern whether or not this is going to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you get into, let's just make a scenario. Let's say you apply to 7 schools. Let's say you get into 4. And let's say of the 4, there were kind of 2 that were really backup. So there's 2 that you do all this for because you're really down to 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
That's kind of like the reality. That's me giving it to you from the parents' perspective. I've been giving it to you from the school's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So with the school's perspective, you have lots of different things because they know that not everything you do will appeal to different people.
Yeah, that makes sense now.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's why it seems so long, because I'm giving you like the litany list.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so now we've, just to recap, because I know this can be really confusing, and I've said a lot of different things. So we started out with prospects, phase 1. We went to inquiries, phase 2. We went to applicants, phase 3. Went to admits, phase 4. I've told you it's an 8-stage model. Then we go to people deposit, and they are planning on coming. But there's still stuff involved in that for you from an administrative side, because you can blow it. You know what this is? I just have another example. I can tell a story. I get to do a corny illustration. I'm going to try to get as many as I can in before you go off into the sunset on us. So this is like a football one. You've marched all the way downfield, and you're like at the 2-yard line. You don't want to fumble the ball now, because you've gone all the way down from your own end zone all the way to the 2-yard line, 98 yards. You don't want to fumble the ball. So there's still things you're doing. What are you doing? You're trying to make sure somebody comes to orientation. And a lot of times orientation is required anyway. So there's all the communication that has to go out there to make sure somebody gets to orientation. You're also doing things like surveys and finding out what are the preferences for this new student, like your roommate surveys and that kind of thing. Because the more people feel like, oh, this is really good, it looks like they're sensitive to me. Some schools have a meet a faculty advisor like early on, right? All these things are things that give a comfort to the family that we're making a good decision. Because keep in mind, even when you're enrolled, you could get off a wait list somewhere else. You can still not come, right?
The whole summer melt.
Oh, that's a good segue, because that's the next one.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is melt. So melt is not actually an intentional step in the process, but it's something that just happens to you.
Right.
And I shared the stats a few weeks ago for Georgia Tech. They have a 14.9% melt for their international admits and a 1.3% melt for their Georgia admits.
Mm.
So, that makes sense, right? You're dealing with visas and
Right.
all kinds of things. Extra cost and flights, and it's just a lot more complicated. And just in general, the farther someone's coming away from home, the more likely they are to melt. You're more likely to, if you're a school in San Diego, California, you're less likely to have melt from Southern California than you are to have melt from, Mississippi or Texas or something.
All right.
And so after you've got your melt done, the last step is your class, and that's who enrolls in the fall. That's who actually enrolls. So those are all the phases of the enrollment funnel.
Okay.
I think it's helpful. At least I thought, I don't know. You tell me, because that's helpful for a parent to know sort of every step along the process from a school's perspective, or is that like, I don't really need to know that stuff.
No, I was feeling that way. I thought it was more like for the admissions folks out there, right? But then as you talked through it and said, okay, these are the things that they're putting out there for you to basically hook you on, that makes sense. That is helpful, because I do want you to know. Because I would imagine some kids just wouldn't know that they have to communicate to a certain extent to express their interest. Not everybody knows that. It sounds like common sense, but not so much.
Yeah, and when you're aware of all the things the school is doing to nurture you along, it sort of implies that you do things like you respond to your emails, you check your portal off, you do the things that you need to do, you send those perforated cards back, you attend sessions and that, because every step along the way, you're kind of being, assessed whether you're engaged or not. And if this is a school you're really interested in, you want to send the message, yeah, I am engaged. The one thing I will say is in recent years, this funnel is not as clear as it used to be. Like a lot of things, the World Wide Web has proven to be a disruptor. And so what's happened with the web and changing demographics is you found a lot of people are like not going through all the phases of the funnel like that, the way they used to. So this would be an example. Let's say I'm a college, Anika, and I buy a list of names, and I want to target people in like Kansas City, Missouri. We don't have that many people from that area. I'm really interested in promoting our aeronautical engineering program because we think we have a really good one, and we don't think that there's that much knowledge of it out there. So I target lists of names of students who express interest on their, I buy a list of names from ACT, SAT, even AP people that did well on the AP, and I can target based on test score, based on gender, based on race, based on intended major, based on self-reported GPA, based on a lot of factors. I won't go into all that because I covered that on a past episode when I talked about how student search works in depth. So I target that, right? And I have my list. And I'm sending emails, I'm sending direct mails, and nothing's happening. Like I'm getting no love, no matter what I send. Like, I'm doing all my, come to a class day, do this, do that. Nothing happens. And all of a sudden, bang, somebody pops into the applicant pool and they're done. So people can jump steps in the process all of a sudden at once. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
If you look at stealth applicants, we call them stealth applicants, they just out of nowhere just popped into your applicant pool. So people are finding information out on the web more and more now. They're using sources like Niche and CapEx and other things like that to get into the applicant pool rather than go through the traditional metrics. So it's not always as systematic as I described it.
Okay.
So what should be a takeaway for a family?
Show your interest or not.
Right. If you're
interested,
stay engaged.
Or don't waste your time, I should say.
Right. Don't waste your time or their time. If you're interested, stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Anika, I'm going to get sentimental next week. It's your last one.
Gonna forget about me soon, Mark. And it's
Stop
okay.
it. I'll be working with little Johnny.
I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna call
already.
in one day. You're gonna be like, "Hey, who? What?"
No, we're gonna get a question from a listener. It's gonna be Anika. I'm gonna be, who's this Anika?
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Enjoy your week.
You do the same.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Let's take it over to our intro, our Mark Kantrowitz intro. Hopefully everybody heard part 1 of my interview with Mark Kantrowitz. It's time for part 2. Here, Mark discusses the plight of the poor on college campuses. He shares how the person responsible for changing the FAFSA has changed. Mark lets us know how cost of attendance is going to be handled differently with the new FAFSA simplification. And Mark discusses changes related to the income protection allowance. Listen and enjoy. So is this primarily designed to address non-billable expenses, almost in the same way scholarships for athletes have a, look at cost of attendance and can include some non-billable factors like personal and miscellaneous expenses?
Well, no, that's cost beyond the cost of attendance. So if you have someone who is in California and they move to the Boston to go to college, well, they're going to need to buy things like boots or rubbers for their shoes, a raincoat, a parka, something that they wouldn't necessarily need in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
That's additional expenses that aren't part of the official cost of attendance. And typically a student might need $300 to $500 a month for a lot of incidental expenses. And even just walking around money to go out on dates and eat at restaurants,
right,
and paid entertainment. That's something that low-income students don't have available, so they miss out on part of the college experience. But the purpose of a negative SAI is to show that there are students who are so low income that they really don't have the money for basic living expenses, let alone college costs. So the idea behind the financial aid formula is you're taking the total income, taxable and untaxed income, and subtracting certain allowances from it. So an allowance for basic living expenses, an allowance for taxes, and other related allowances. Well, if someone is living below the poverty line, they have absolutely no discretion in how they spend their money, and they may be going hungry because they don't have enough money to buy food. Or some of these low-income students may be the primary wage earner for their family, and when they earn money, it's not necessarily going to pay for college. It's going to pay to put food on the table for the rest of their family. So this is trying to address that in a very limited extent. I mean, it's only allowing it to go negative 1,500 as opposed to even lower. But we really have food insecurity. A lot of colleges are starting to create soup kitchens or food pantries for their students. And there are a lot of homeless students on college campuses that don't have a fixed regular place. When a student's living in the dorms and the college shuts down for winter break, there are some students who have nowhere to go. And if they're kicked off campus in the winter break and the summer break, they're on the streets, homeless, living out of a car, living on a friend's couch, or just struggling.
Yeah.
And this is a growing realization that there are some really big challenges that some students face. And it's not a trivial number of students. It's a substantial percentage of students who are homeless or at risk of homelessness.
Yeah, well, maybe one good thing with the pandemic is bringing heightened consciousness to food insecurity. No question about it. This is a real issue, and I appreciate you taking some time to go into some depth on that. Another one of the really big changes in FAFSA simplification is the change in who's responsible for completing the FAFSA, particularly for separated, divorced, never married, or never remarried parents. Can you talk about this and explain why this is so significant?
Well, previously, the FAFSA, when the student's parents are divorced or separated or never even married, it was based on where the student lived. So most years, there's an odd number of days in the year, and that would then be definitive because you count the number of nights where the student slept. Occasionally, you would have parents splitting it right down the middle, where maybe it was a leap year, or maybe it was a recent divorce with an even number of days between the date of the divorce and the date when FAFSA was filed. But it was generally based on where the student lived. The new FAFSA is going to base it on whichever parent provides more financial support to the student. And if that doesn't distinguish it, it'll be whichever parent has the greater income. So this is, in a way, it's going to be fairer because it's based on who really has the ability to pay for college. And they may not be willing to pay for college, but they certainly have the ability to pay for college. But it's also potentially going to be better aligned with the tax returns. Now, the law doesn't specify what time period is used for determining this, whichever parent provided more financial support. And for family size, it is definitely based on someone being claimed as a dependent on their parent's tax return. But for determining which parent's tax return for the student, as opposed to family size, that was left unspecified. So the U.S. Department of Education is going to have to issue guidance that says, is it the most recent 12 months? Is it the prior year? What's the basis for that? And there's also, even for the family size, claiming a student as a dependent on their federal income tax return is not necessarily the same as which parent provided more financial support to that dependent. Because in divorce cases, you can have what's called a multiple support agreement, where the two parents agree, usually as part of the divorce decree or the financial settlement, that one of them is going to get to claim the student and the other children as dependents and the other won't. Sometimes they do odd and even years, so one claims it in the odd years, the other claims it in the even years. And that will not necessarily reflect which parent is actually providing more than half the support. So they're going to have some kind of process where the parents can say, well, the information on the tax returns doesn't actually reflect who's providing the support. We're going to specify this parent as the one who's providing the financial support to the dependents.
Yeah, sounds like there's a few I's to dot and T's to cross there, but still seems like an improvement. I know I've been involved in lots of conversations before, and people would there's a lot of gamesmanship involved in which parent do you claim and go live with this parent and claim this parent. And it kind of felt like there was some inequity there. People that had access to that kind of knowledge could in some ways game the system. So
it certainly can manipulate which parent is responsible. And usually they would have to go back to court to change the child custody arrangement back when it was based on where the child lived. But by making the parent who has the lower income be the one completing the FAFSA, then they could potentially qualify for more financial aid. Of course, there were complexities. What if this parent gets remarried?
Correct.
And
seen that
or his new spouse is their income and assets must be reported, even if there's a prenuptial agreement. So now, when it's based on financial support starting in 2023-24, it will have the same issue with if the parent is providing more financial support gets remarried, then the income and assets of the step-parent will also get counted. Now, really sophisticated parents, they could do things like, if it's going to be the prior year as a basis of support, they could manipulate which parent provides more financial support so that it's the parent with the lower income. And so there's still going to be some gamesmanship going on.
Right.
But it perhaps is going to be a bit fairer.
I think a little bit.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, every year, the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, also known as NACAC, produces its State of College Admissions Report, and that is our recommended resource for episode 170. I remember the first time I discovered this, I could not put it down because it answers questions like, which do colleges count more when making decisions? Recommendation, interviews, demonstrated interest, the transcript, test scores, things like that. Gives detailed information on factors involved in admissions decision, recruitment and yield strategies, college applications, whether the number's going up or down from the previous year, and detailed information on the college counseling in secondary schools. This is a highly scientific, well-researched survey, and you can see trends. There's a great summary report, and you could really dive into the details. We'll put a link in the show notes, but I can't recommend it highly enough. And it's a recommended resource for episode 170. Now return to my interview with Mark Kantrowitz. Another exciting change to me is the requirement that colleges have to report full cost of attendance on their website. Can you explain, well, why don't you, most of our listeners will know what cost of attendance is. We have a lot of college counselors and pretty informed parents, but there's always new listeners. Why don't you explain, what cost of attendance is and how this is a change from previous requirements?
So the cost of attendance includes direct costs like tuition and fees, and if the student's living in college-owned or controlled housing, room and board, and indirect costs that aren't paid to the college but are nevertheless part of the cost of going to college, such as textbooks, transportation to and from the college, disability-related expenses, if the student has children, childcare-related expenses while they're going to class, things like that. The problem is that when colleges send financial aid award letters to students that list the financial aid that the student's going to receive, many of them don't list the cost there. So you have the aid, but you don't know how much the college is actually going to cost you. And some of those that did provide the costs only listed the direct costs, not the full cost of attendance. And even among those that listed the full cost of attendance, it was really hard to figure out what the net price of the college is. The net price is the difference between the total cost of attendance and the gift aid, the grants and scholarships and other money that doesn't have to be repaid. That's your kind of discounted sticker price. It's known as the net price. And that's the amount of money that you're going to have to pay from your savings, from your current income, and from loans to cover the college costs. It's kind of your bottom line cost of college. Now, a lot of these financial aid award letters, in addition to not being very clear on the costs, were also not very clear on the financial aid. They don't distinguish between a grant, which doesn't have to be repaid, and a loan. And you might see a line that says Fed Staff L. And you have to read tea leaves to understand that the L means loan, because all it is a dollar amount. They don't list the interest rate or the monthly payment on a 10-year repayment term or any signals that this is money that has to be repaid. And they might mix them all together. So you'll have a grant, then a loan, then a grant, then a loan, then it's student employment. There is a standardized college shopping sheet, which they now call the college financing statement, which kind of obscures the purpose of it. But what it does is it, first of all, it segregates the types of financial aid by type. So you have a set of lines for grants and scholarships, the gift aid, a set of lines for student employment, and a set of lines for student loans. And it then provides you with the total of each and subtracts the total for the gift aid from the total for the cost of attendance, and then displays this as your net price. And that's a good number for comparing two different colleges. The one with the lower net price is probably going to be less expensive. I say probably because there's even some manipulation there. About half of all colleges practice what's called front loading of grants, where they give you a better mix of grants than loans during the freshman year. In subsequent years, the grants go down and loans go up, or maybe the grants stay the same, but the costs are going up, so the loans are going up. And so your net price can go up in subsequent years. And so that makes it, that first year net price may not be reflective of your net price for all 4 years.
Yeah, that's why I'm excited to have the full cost of attendance actually on websites, and hopefully there'll be, real enforcement of that. I'm also hearing that there are changes in actually the cost of attendance that are coming out in this. A few changes, the factors that are included in cost of attendance. Can you comment on that, Mark?
Okay, so the first thing is the U.S. Department of Education is going to have the authority to regulate the cost of attendance for the first time. They can't regulate tuition, but everything else can be regulated. So a common problem is that some colleges would underestimate the cost of textbooks or transportation so to make themselves look cheaper. And the U.S. Department of Education will be able to set standards on how you estimate the textbook, because obviously different academic majors have different textbooks. And a physics class could have one textbook that costs a few $100s, whereas a humanities class may have more books, but they're relatively inexpensive, English literature. The transportation cost, well, if you have a student who's coming halfway across the country, they're going to have higher costs than a student who lives 3 miles away. And how many times does that student travel home from school? Is it daily? Is it during the spring break, summer break, winter break, and Thanksgiving break? How many times? And depending on your assumptions, it can affect the cost. Now, with regard to room and board, they're separating out those two figures instead of having one monolithic figure. And they're adding several additional categories. And they're also adding a requirement that the board, which is your meal plan, must be based on an assumption of 3 meals a day. Because some colleges were assuming just 1 meal a day, which is not realistic for some students. Some students need to eat 3 meals a day. Some students are trying to avoid the freshman 15, and 1 meal a day is fine for them. And there's additional details with regard to some of the other expenses. And it's also going to be clear that the students can appeal if they have unusual circumstances. So if your textbook costs are higher than the allowance in the cost of attendance, you can bring your receipts to the financial aid office and ask them to increase the cost of attendance to reflect your actual textbook costs. And they're fine-tuning things like, and you can add, the college can add the loan fees to the cost of attendance, but only for the federal loans. They're no longer allowing that for the private loans. And that's fine because most private loans don't have fees. They roll it into the interest rate anyway.
This is good. It seems like it's moving to more accuracy here and more full disclosure. Now let's talk about the income protection allowance. There's another acronym, right? IPA. I know there's some changes in FAFSA Simplification Act related to the income protection allowance. Can you share this? My understanding is this is a positive change and looks like it's increasing.
Okay, so the income protection allowance is increasing substantially. And that's partly to compensate for other changes in the formula. But it's also, they're creating this new category of single parent households. And that includes both the student has just one parent, their parents are divorced, separated, or widowed, as well as students who are themselves, they're an independent student, they have a child.
Mark, why don't you explain IPA? Because I think a lot of our listeners may not know what it is. You don't mind just starting with the basic concept.
So IPA is an acronym for Income Protection Allowance, which is a basic living expense allowance. Previously, it was dependent on the family size and the number of children in college. Now it's going to be based solely on family size. And the idea is to cover food, clothing, housing, medical care, and other basic living expenses for the family based on the number of family members. So typically, a family of 4 might have an IPA of around $30,000. This allowance is subtracted from total income because it's thought of as a non-discretionary expense. It's something that you have to spend because you need to live. And then by subtracting it from total income, what's left over after subtracting other allowances, such as allowances for taxes, that's your discretionary income. And then the financial aid formulas assess a portion of discretionary income. And so the idea is that, well, that's money that's available to pay for college costs. And it's a harsh definition of ability to pay because the IPA is really low compared to the actual expenses for many families. But at least it's gone an increase fairly substantially as part of this FAFSA simplification.
Right. So the idea is there's a basic amount of money everybody needs just for subsistence. And you're not going to be expected to apply any of that toward the cost of a college until you at least get to your income protection allowance. I've heard it's going up 20%. Is that true? That may not be accurate, but I heard that somewhere.
It depends on the type of student, dependent, independent, single parent. It's going up by 35 to 60%.
Oh, wow. That's significant.
So it's a big improvement. The 60% is for students who are single parents. But that is definitely going to make it easier for some students to pay for college. There are other changes in the formula that make it more difficult especially for middle and high income families that have 2 or more children in college at the same time.
Now it's time for our college spotlight of the week. Friends, very excited to be back with Dr. Lisa Ruff for another college spotlight. How are you doing there, Lisa?
Well, I'm doing great, Mark. It's great to be back.
Thank you. So our regular listeners will know Lisa and I teamed up and did one on SLU. And then she took the lead on both the University of Chicago as well as on Indiana University and has made a commitment to do almost one a month for most months to help me out a little bit on these. And she focuses on some schools that she knows better than I do. And we're very excited today to have you talk about DePaul, Lisa. So take it away and share whatever's on your heart.
All right. Well, I'm really happy to talk about DePaul University. I feel like it's a school that has such a great mission. And my husband got his master's in economics there many years ago. But I have to confess, this is the only school out of the 4 that we attended that we donate to on a regular basis.
Oh, that says a lot.
And it's mostly because we really feel the money is going to good use. It's kind of hard to feel super sympathetic to the University of Chicago and Northwestern's pleas sometimes because their endowment is so huge.
Yeah, I can relate.
But DePaul is really committed to helping people who otherwise wouldn't have access to a college education to get one and to help them improve their lives and the lives of their families. So we always donate to them.
Nice.
But DePaul is a really big feature of the Chicago landscape. Living in Chicago, you really can't miss DePaul. It has campuses both in Lincoln Park, which is on the near north side, and in downtown in the Loop. So if you're in Chicago, you're never too far from the DePaul classroom. DePaul is known for an urban vibe, and its campus is integrated into the surrounding community. So it's a great school to consider if you want to go to college in a large, vibrant city. It should be on your list of, things to research. The main campus is located in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. And the Lincoln Park neighborhood is named after Lincoln Park, which is sort of like a New York Central Park style park. And it's right along the lake on the north side of the city. Lincoln Park is great. It has a zoo. It has walking and running trails. It has a lake with paddle boats that are actually really hard to paddle, at least for me.
Have you got out and tried them?
I have and failed.
As long as you didn't fall in Lake Michigan or something.
That's right. No. And DePaul is walking distance from Lake Michigan, and Lake Michigan is beautiful. I would say in the spring, summer, and fall. In the winter, it's also beautiful, but perhaps not so comfortable to be on. There are lots of running and biking paths. There are marinas. There are beaches around the lakes. Lincoln Park is also known for its great restaurants and shops, and it's a magnet for the young and the hip. DePaul University is just right by the Fullerton stop on the L, which it has two trains, the red line and the brown line, that both go downtown. So you could be downtown in 10 to 20 minutes, depending on when your train comes. And Chicago, of course, is a major city, and it's got all the trimmings. It's got great museums, theaters, street festivals, Lollapalooza, my daughter would like to point out, and lots of other fun things for kids to do. DePaul also has a downtown campus, which is in the Chicago Loop, and that houses its College of Business, Law, Communication, and Computing and Digital Media. And it's basically like a really big high-rise complex. It's right in the financial district of the city. It's a little busy there during the weekdays. Sometimes it can be a little quiet in that neighborhood late at night on the weekends, but it is close to lots of neighborhoods where there is more action happening than you can imagine at all hours of the day. DePaul is the largest Catholic university in America. It has around 14,500 undergraduates and about 8,000 graduate students. And DePaul is also known as one of the most diverse schools in the country. In keeping with DePaul's commitment to diversity and access to education, 39% to 40% of the student body are students of color. DePaul is also known as one of the most liberal schools in the United States, especially for a Catholic university. And the theories are that it's mostly because it's in Chicago, which is a very, liberal city and hasn't had a Republican mayor since 1931.
Yeah, one of the things I love about DePaul's diversity, it's got the, sizable Hispanic, Black, and Asian and Caucasian communities and multiracial, but it also has a sizable number of Pell Grant students, actually almost 30%. And
yes,
I've just been thinking about that a lot lately as schools claim to be so diverse, but such a huge component of diversity is socioeconomic diversity. Like if you're at a school and everybody, is just used to what a $300,000 to $500,000 lifestyle is like, you can produce a certain type of disconnect from sort of the average man.
Absolutely.
And it seems like DePaul, even from students I've worked, it seems like they try hard to give scholarships to make it affordable. Like they can't meet full demonstrated need. But I understand that you just need substantial amounts of money to be able to do that. But students I've worked with, they've consistently gotten some money. I feel like they do their best to make it affordable.
They really do. And DePaul is so committed to the citizens of Chicago and helping kids who otherwise couldn't go to college, that they have a $20,000 Chicago Promise Scholarship for any Chicago public school graduate who has a 3.7 GPA or higher. And they also do a lot of articulation agreements with community colleges, both in Chicago and in the surrounding counties. The community college in my former neighborhood, the College of Lake County, had a wonderful articulation program. So you could take your first 2 years at CLC and then transfer seamlessly into DePaul. And DePaul even had some classes that were held on their campus just to make it easier for students who had a hard time commuting. So they really bring in people who otherwise might not be able to get a 4-year degree.
Now, one question I've always had about DePaul, I know only around 1 in 5 students lives on campus.
That's true.
So it gets the knock as a commuter school. Like, is that fair? Is that not fair? And how does that impact the culture of the school?
Well, I think that it is fair. They don't require anyone to live on campus, not even freshman year, but they do have dorms. And I think that, a lot of freshmen that can afford it do live in the dorms. They have dorms both in the Lincoln Park campus and the downtown campus. But truly most students end up getting apartments. So I feel like it's more, it might be like less of a sense of a feeling of a defined campus and more of a sense of being in the city and doing the city things and being around your friends than, let's say my daughter has an Elon where, she's got her dorm friends and then the friends over in the next dorm, and it's kind of more centralized that way.
So let me ask a follow-up on that, because normally when a school is that way, and Georgia State's that way in Atlanta, certainly George Washington is that way in D.C., NYU is that way, and BU and Northeastern are kind of that way in a lot of ways as well. Maybe not quite as much, but it can take a higher level of maturity for a kid because they're just kind of like living in the city without sort of the built-in community that can happen. Do you feel there's any truth to that? Like, do you feel if a student was relocating, like I'm talking about not a Chicago kid who's got their home base like 30 to 45 minutes away, but let's say somebody comes from, let's just say, a Texas or, San Francisco, and they're at DePaul and they're not in the dorms freshman year. Do you feel it would require sort of more independence or maturity for that student to successfully get integrated into the community than a more community-based school with a high residential population?
Well, I would say yes and no. In terms of like living on your own and being responsible for yourself, yes, I do think that DePaul requires an additional level of maturity. But DePaul is well known for having a lot of supports for students. For instance, they're very well known as being a great school to go to if you have a learning difference because they have so many supports for that. So I think maybe in terms of living, yes, but in terms of your academics, I think they really do try to reach out to students and help them however they can.
That's great. Another thing I always hear about DePaul is that it's sort of a feeder into the sort of the business community within Chicago. Is that true? Is that not true? Is that rumor? What are your thoughts on that? Why don't you elaborate on that?
Oh, it's absolutely true. I mean, DePaul it has a really strong business and accounting program, and it's very well respected into the city of Chicago and the surrounding areas. There are tons of internships that students can do, and they have very high employment rates. It's one of the most popular majors for undergraduates at DePaul.
That's great. That's great. And I know you've sort of touched on the Loop campus and how, and how it's different from the Lincoln Park campus. Do you know, do students get a choice which campus they go to? Does it depend on which major you're in, which campus you're assigned to? How does that whole system work?
It depends on which major you go to. So, for instance, if you're a communications major, a business major, or a computer sciences major, then you're going to be taking your classes at the Loop campus. You could live, in an apartment. You can live on the Loop campus. You could probably get into the dorms in Lincoln Park and then commute. But it's based on what classes you're taking in your major.
Okay. And what's your sense of sort of the level of rigor, the level of challenge, sort of that whole piece of DePaul?
Well, I think that, DePaul really tries to make their education accessible. And so in that sense, I think maybe, it might not have the rigor of the University of Chicago, but they also have a lot of benefits. One of the things I was so impressed by when I was doing research for DePaul was how many combined undergraduate, graduate programs they have. They pretty much have them in every major for everything. So you can come out of DePaul with, let's say, a communications degree and a law degree in 6 years. You can come out of, with a business and MBA degree in 5 years. It has a lot of opportunities to grow intellectually that maybe aren't so much due as to the rigor as to the opportunities that are available.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And what are the ways in which you feel being a Catholic institution impacts DePaul?
It was started by, the Vincentians. I hope I'm saying that right. And that order of monks was extremely focused on community service and helping people of, limited means. And I think DePaul does follow that mission, but I don't think students are required to go to church or take religion classes or anything like that. So it's more about the mission of the school, but less about the day-to-day Catholicism in students' lives.
Yeah, but I would argue that's still a big application of the religious mission, right? And so, because a lot of times Catholic schools have a strong commitment to helping the less fortunate and to access and just providing, education for everybody. And I am hearing you say those kinds of things.
Right. I mean, I think I've read some criticism of DePaul from Catholics that it's too liberal and too left leaning. So it doesn't support maybe all of some of the teachings of the church or the values of the church. But I think you're absolutely right that overall, its mission is completely concordant with the Catholic Church and its mission.
No, that's great. That's great. One of the other things actually that I've heard, that DePaul is strong in is like, gaming, animation, film, that kind of thing. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. They have a great game design program, and it's extremely well respected. They have, I think, 4 different gaming labs that you can use. They have a game play lab, an augmented reality lab. I don't really understand what any of that means, but it sounds very impressive.
Yeah. Well, you're looking to the wrong person for help.
Yeah.
You really are.
It's one of the most highly respected game design programs around. And the animation program is also excellent. And you can get either a Bachelor of Arts or a BFA actually in animation. So there's lots of opportunities for kids there. The film school is also known to be excellent. And I think that, they have a partnership with CineSpace, which is a film production company in Chicago, and they do a lot with them. So that's a great, great program that is very well respected and really popular. They have all the things. They have like the editing suites, green room, all the things that you would need to be successful in that major.
Nice. Talk to me a little bit about their admission process. Do they admit by major? Do they admit by school? Do they admit into just the college overall? And then students have to apply once they're there into respective programs. How does all that work?
Well, DePaul generally is a holistic admissions and you apply into the school, but there are some exceptions to that. And that's if you're applying into the theater department in a performance major or into the music department in a performance major, then there's a separate audition or portfolio process depending on your focus that is required. So you can be admitted into DePaul University, but not necessarily admitted into the theater or music school. But in general, you just can go in undecided and access any major. DePaul has long been test optional. It's one of the first schools to go test optional.
I remember that.
And John Bokenstadt used to be their admissions director, and he is a very articulate critic of the test taking movement. And so he has always felt it to be unfair to lower income students. And so he provided them the opportunity to write an optional essay instead of submitting test scores for many years.
Bokenstadt, he's probably as articulate on advocating for test optional as anybody. And he comes with data galore when he does it too. So he's someone, I follow him on Twitter and I've interacted with him by email back and forth on some things. We've run a couple articles he did. He's also against recommendations as well, as he feels it biases private schools that have great recommendation writers. So he's an interesting character. As one person, I won't mention who it is, who's been on our podcast before, said about him when I was meeting with him, he said he has very strong opinions, that guy.
I like it. I like person with strong opinions. You know where he's coming from. And I've heard some podcasts where he's been interviewed and read his blog, and he's a really smart guy. And,
he really is.
He makes a lot of compelling arguments.
He does. He would have been a great attorney. He really can present. He
shakes up stuff. I think he shakes up stuff in college admissions. So that's great.
Well, I know he was at DePaul, I believe, for maybe more than 15 years, but he's at Oregon State now.
Right. Right.
After maybe just most recently, it was just weird that he ended up there. So that's interesting. Just to me, he's like Mr. DePaul.
Right. Right.
So let's talk a little bit more about their admission process. So Common App, Coalition, online application. What are the applications they take?
They take the Common Application. And they, I guess, in their student profile, I think the average GPA, the median GPA is 3.75. Median ACT scores are 23 to 28. And median SAT composite score is 1180.
So I've definitely seen them take students that are noticeably below that. Like I know
Right.
median means 50% are below, but people always think medians are cutoffs.
Right.
So, so do you have a sense of the range of students they take?
They take their admission rate is 68%. And because they are test optional, I think they're more flexible than many schools in the Chicagoland area, and they're more willing to look at a student's essays and who they are as a person rather than just merely their grades. So they admit a wide variety of students.
So let's talk a little bit about like other components of what they require. So we've already said they're test optional. We've already said in the past there's no such thing as transcript optional unless it's like, some open enrollment schools, but some for-profit schools and things like that. So we know they require transcript. We know they don't require test scores. Do you know what they require when it comes to recommendations and essays and things like that?
I think they require an essay. I believe that letters of recommendation are optional. I'd have to go back and check that.
Well, I'm sure they are because I just remember Backenstadt railing against them. That I know. I just remembered that we actually did an article early on in the podcast on from him, and he wrote it. And that was back in the day. If you go back and look at the early days on our website, Your College Bound Kid, I put a picture up of every single person that we selected. But it was just so much work, and some people are like, "I don't want that picture," and then had to get the image editor to put their name. It was just so we dropped it. But he was really good at sending us some photos to put up because we featured him. And so, do you remember what the essay is that they require, or whether there's college specific essays or anything?
I believe there's just the Common App essay. I don't believe that there's any college specific essays, but again, I'd have to go back and check that because it's been a little bit since I looked at that.
Yeah, that's okay. I know I'm throwing you on the spot there. Not a big deal. So what do you see sort of how they are when it comes to athletics? Obviously, they're in the Big East Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there's I'm really aging myself here, but I remember DePaul. Like I grew up like cheering for DePaul because there was a time when they had like Mark Aguirre and Terry Cummings, and they were like 3 years in a row, they were ranked number 1 in basketball in the country, and they were almost ranked wire to wire number 1.
Yeah.
So they haven't had that kind of success in decades. But this is like, I'm probably like 14 and this is happening, I'm like early teens.
Right.
And so and so they were like at one point a basketball powerhouse. Do you have a sense whether like they rock the gym and students do the face paint and really get into the sports culture, or does that feel like, they have that there, but it's not really a sort of an integral part of the student's social life experience?
I think that they have it there, but I think if you want to go to a school that's really into sports and the tailgating and the face painting, this might not be the best match for you. They don't have football. They got rid of that. The basketball team is what they're best known for, the men's basketball team. And as an interesting aside, when my husband was getting his master's in economics, his work study job was tutoring the basketball students in math.
Nice.
And I asked him if they were nice, and I asked him if they were smart. And he said, no, they were all really nice and they were all really smart. I felt kind of like I was wasting their time tutoring them, but it was required that they go see him just to make sure that their grades were okay.
Love it.
So their main rivals are Loyola, which is also in Chicago, and Notre Dame, which is in Indiana.
I would think they'd also be a rival with Marquette, too, just as another city school. And they were both in the Big East. And, I'm sure they're all, you have more than one rival. So,
yeah. Not a lot of Greek life at DePaul either. So maybe 8% of students are in fraternities or sororities, and there are no formal houses. So again, if that's something that's really important to you, this might not be the best fit.
Yeah, my sense is that basketball still has a kind of a lot of passion there, even that they haven't had that much success. A lot of times when schools don't have football, then basketball becomes the big sport. I don't know other than that, what they're like athletically. They probably are not very big with baseball and that kind of stuff, just because, they're a city school, and most urban city schools, especially in the north, tend not to have a lot going on there. Talk to me about like internships and career center. Do you know anything about sort of that aspect of the school and whether students are pleased with sort of their whole job placement program?
That's a very strong aspect of DePaul. All of their, big departments have connections with places in Chicago where students can do internships. And, as typical, a lot of times students will get offered a job from those internships. So they really help set students up. And then again, Chicago, there's just so much available. There's a lot of options there.
So what would be the reasons you feel a student out of the region would pick DePaul?
Well, if you would like a school that is in an urban setting that's integrated into the city, if you like a school that has a mission that you agree with, if you want to go to a very diverse school where you're going to meet a lot of different people, and if you're interested in any of the things that they are really well known for, like business, communications, animation, game design, and you didn't talk about this, but I definitely want to touch on it, theater and music are fantastic at DePaul. So if you're interested in one of those programs, it could be a really great fit for you.
And do you have a sense of sort of like class size and that kind of thing? Does it feel like, kind of do people feel just like they're a number in the classroom? Or does it feel like there's personal individual's attention? Any sense on that?
I think that the class size, I think their student faculty ratio is 16-1. And 40% of the classes have fewer than 20 students. Some of the bigger intro classes have a lot more students. And as you go on in your major, as is typical in a lot of colleges, the classes get smaller.
No, this is great. And is there anything else you want to comment on the theater? You mentioned it was really good.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic program. It's one of the most well-respected theater programs in the country. They've acquired the Goodman Theater School, and Goodman Theater has been a classic Chicago theater for decades, and they acquired that. And I was just so impressed because they have like every kind of major that you could possibly imagine in theater. They have like every kind of major. They have set design, sound, costume, acting, screenwriting, all of the different kinds of things. And the same goes for their music program as also. They have a performance component, both vocal and instrumental, which is excellent. But then they have like editing, recording, majors in all these different things that, you might not be able to find many other places that are very specific.
Nice. Another program they have that has a really good reputation is public relations. Are you familiar at all with that?
Yes. That is a really popular program. It's one of the most popular programs at the school. And you can either do public relations or advertising. And they have lots of opportunities for internships there. And they have really good placement with leading Chicago public relations and advertising agencies when people graduate. So it's an excellent program with a lot of hands-on experience.
It really sounds like it could be just a great school for someone that knows they might want to live in Chicago as a way to get, kind of integrated into the culture. And I know they have some, sort of classes or orientation that sort of orients them to the city. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, I believe it's called Chicago 101. I might be messing up the name, but there's a class that you take as a freshman, and they tell you how to ride the L. You get to go to all the different museums and cultural venues in the city. It's a great class that shows you all the neighborhoods and all that Chicago has to offer and how to access them.
I love it when schools do that, because it's not just about your four walls, particularly when you're in a place like Chicago. Like, your education can be so enhanced if you can access the resources of the city. And, to leave it up to an 18-year-old to find on its own, I mean, you could do that, but why not, show you how to ride the L and include things like that in what you provide as a resource. I mean, I think that's kind of shows some creativity and some broad-mindedness on their part.
Yeah, I really wish that I had had that when I went to the University of Chicago, coming from a somewhat rural area, learning how to cross the street and ride the bus. Those were challenges for me. So I really would have liked a Chicago 101 class back in the day.
No, it makes sense. And I think schools have just gotten better at that kind of thing over time than they were, I'm not saying you went to school in the dinosaur age, Lisa.
I pretty much did. Maybe before the dinosaurs. I don't know.
Well, I'm older than you, so what does that say about me and Dave? So this is great. Anything else you haven't shared that you want to share before we call it a day on DePaul?
just take a look and see. I think their tuition is pretty reasonable. So their tuition is around $42,000 and living expenses around $18,000. But most students get aid, and I think the average merit amount is around $19,000 to $20,000. So it can be very affordable for kids. And certainly if you do live in the city and you want to stay home, this could be a really affordable option for you. I think it can be a bargain for students who are going to programs that are really highly respected also. And I think it's a great school to consider.
I do want to ask you another question. Some of the programs you talked about, the 6-year law program and some of those accelerated programs that they have in various areas. Do you have a sense how competitive those are to get in?
I don't think they're that competitive. I think it's maybe based on GPA. I know like for things like the law school, it's a little more competitive, but they have them in everything. So I think they're relatively accessible to students.
Sounds good. Well, listen, you're our Chicago gal. Between you and Dave, we got Chi-Town covered.
Yeah.
And I know about Lake Michigan because, Dave will call me when he's riding his bike and it's in the middle of the winter and he has a full-blown face mask over. I'm just picturing him looking like Spider-Man.
I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, because I can hardly hear him. His voice is all muffled, And I'm like, I can't hear you. I'm driving in Lake Michigan. It's like I respect it. It's like he does it to like develop mental toughness or something.
I don't know. He probably needs you on the phone in case he dies or something happens to him. You can call 911. It's that safety phone call.
He's like tougher than me. I'm like sitting in my backyard, looking at my trees, just chilling out. And he's toughening it up there in Chicago's winters.
Yeah, it does teach you a lot of tolerance for pain and patience. So winter can have its emotional and developmental benefits, I suppose. But I felt like I was done with that. So that's why I left.
Did I ever tell you I lived in Chicago for 1 year?
You mentioned it because you were at the divinity school, right?
Yeah, Moody Bible Institute, right on LaSalle in Chicago, like right smack downtown.
Right.
And I mean, and 1 year was more like 9. Well, actually, I did stay the whole year. I stayed through the summer there as well. And, I was really young then. And boy, I remember driving around in that traffic because they had cars that we could just use to go to do our ministry. So I worked at the Audi Home, just like a juvenile detention center that feeds into Cook County prison system. It's for people 14 around that age that have committed serious crimes. So I did a counseling internship there. And then I worked at a Korean Presbyterian church when I was there. And I remember once it was so cold. I literally was, and it was so windy. I was tempted to lean backwards and see if the wind could hold me up. I'm like, this wind could probably hold me up, but I didn't want to chance it.
You didn't want to trust fall with the wind?
Yes, no, I didn't.
Great idea. No, you were young, but you still had good judgment. Yeah, definitely if you're going to go to DePaul, you don't bring your car. Take the L. That's just the best way to go.
Yeah, and the L was an experience for me at first because, if you're not used to that, I mean, you see a little bit of everything on there.
Oh, yeah. And you smell a little bit of everything. I think that the L has gotten a lot cleaner over time, but I can remember just being shocked because this was back in the days before they had some really good antipsychotics for people. And so you just see people ranting and ranting and ranting on the L, just going on. And, I started to develop kind of, a blind eye for it. And then their cell phones came to be. And then I couldn't tell if people were talking on their cell phone or they were ranting. But you did see a lot of stuff going on the L that you won't get that kind of experience anywhere else.
Well, I know Chicago's changed a lot. So, I was in Chicago when they still had all the high-rise projects. Yeah. And I remember studying, how they built their freeway right through to keep, under-resourced Black kids mostly kind of away from sort of the...
Yes, yeah.
And so, Robert Taylor Holmes, Cabrini Green. In fact, that was a big brother for a student, like a 13-year-old in Cabrini Green. I remember I visited him in his house and I was like, hey, there's a good basketball court down there. You want to go shoot hoops? And he's like, no, we can't shoot hoops on that hoop. Stray bullets are flying over there. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take you up on that. but I know they've like plowed all those down and have made a lot of changes since then.
Well, where Cabrini Green was now is like luxury housing and shopping and restaurants, which I think is, controversial. But Chicago still is kind of a city of the haves and the have-nots, I'm sorry to say. And so you can be in some neighborhoods that are so beautiful and really safe. And then there are neighborhoods that are just, disadvantaged, and there's a lot of violence, and they're, just a few miles away from each other.
Well, listen, this has been fantastic, Lisa. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Next week in the news, the Supreme Court seems ready to back payments to student athletes. A New York Times article by Adam Liptak. Mark and Anika will discuss how can I develop the character to withstand life's storms. And Mark, I believe this is going to be the last chapter in the Mark and Anika.
We're retiring the book.
That's right. So be there or be square. What is more important, your grade in an AP class or your AP test score? That's a great question. And our interview is part 3 of 4 with Mark Kantrowitz on the new Simplified FAFSA. And there will be no college spotlight next week.
Yeah, some of our best questions come from students. That one's from a student about AP score versus AP class. The question is, Dave, can we get our episodes to 90 minutes without the book? That's the challenge. We'll see.
No problem. I think just to put a little bit more caffeine in our coffee, we'll go all day.
All right. Dave's closing on a big 8-person property house there. And so he's calling me from his car outside Home Depot before he takes over the whole city of Chicago with his real estate empire. So I'll go let him go do his thing, man. Next thing I know, you're going to be buying University of Chicago.
No, I just saving my pennies for my Tesla.
All right. Talk to you later, my friend.
No problem, friend.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our 3 co-hosts, Anika Madden, Dr. David Williams, and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan, and our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.